The school was called Tractor, interestingly enough. Given the limited number of letters in the Latin alphabet and the limited number of ways phonemes could be represented in English, Harris felt he shouldn't have been that surprised. Of course, in an entire galaxy, there would be some place coincidentally named Tractor. There were probably a bunch of places with similarly fortuitous names, he reflected. Harris mentally added the entry, "Visit places with funny names and write a book about it," to his list of things he wanted to do at some point. For the moment, though, he had to be content with visiting Tractor School for the near full-grown but still immature. Harris grinned internally at the moniker. Initial translation teams that had gone with the narrate First Contact mission had tried to render the school title as High School in English for the sake of brevity, but one of their number had refused to sign off on the translation and insisted that, though long, School for the near full-grown but still immature was much more fitting to their culture. Harris was immensely glad for their conviction, as rarely did the name of an institution tell him so much of what to expect. It felt like he barely needed his dossier, though he did review it to make sure he did right by his role as ambassador of humanity to the Larabs. Gelatinous bodies, communal social structures, strong predilection to what most would closely map to the Earth concept of communism politically and economically. Larabs stood about a meter tall and about 2/3 of a meter wide, reminding Harris of sentient gumdrops with swirly hair. He had only had the chance to speak with one in person before this point. Immunization protocols took a long time despite the low chance of alien organisms being biocompatible with anything not of their planet, but the medical team had finally cleared the others to move forward with their parts of the Galactic Integration and Fellowship Initiative. Larabs had a burbling undertone to their speech, even through the translators, which Harris found himself strangely fond of. It reminded him of the simmering, roiling pop of steam bubbles in a hot pot that signalled an imminent meal. The shuttle landed and Harris stood. It was time to give his talk. The auditorium was packed, unusual to Harris's human mind. It sloped down from a raised central dais like a reverse amphitheatre, relying on the elevation of the focal stage to let the audience see. Given the remarkable consistency of Larrett body measurements, it was easy to curve the seating around the stage just such that everyone could easily see. Harris set his notes on the lectern that had been brought in by Jeffy's staff, and gave himself a moment to think as the gentle, untranslated burbling of the crowded students subsided. Someone must have taken the lid off the hot pot. Harris's stomach rumbled at the thought, but he pushed through to start the lecture. The most common greeting of my people, humanity, in the language I am speaking currently, English, is some variation of good morning or good afternoon. So good morning, everybody. My name is Harris Applebees. I will be the GFE correspondent for humanity for this general area of your fine planet. Thank you all for your warm welcome. The Tractor School for the near full-grown but still immature is a beautiful building, and makes me look forward to learning more about Larab architecture. That being said, the purpose behind this lecture is for me to introduce my people and give you some information so that us humans won't feel completely alien to you when we inevitably bump into each other out in the stars. I believe the school council had some words before I begin, though. 4 Larabs climbed from nearby seats and up to the stage, and gave a brief address to the collected students, encouraging them to listen and to hold questions to the end. That being said, they gestured back to Harris with a wiggle of their flank to indicate that he should resume his position and begin. He stepped to the lectern, took a deep breath, smiled, and launched into the presentation. Things went smoothly and nobody interrupted, which was nice. The circular layout of the stage and audience took some getting used to, but I fell into a rhythm of slow rotation so I could address different parts of the crowd that felt good to me. The presentation was to a solid hour and a half of speaking, and right after ending, I took a break to drink water while the students formulated their thoughts and questions. Soon enough, though, I saw a Larab stretch up in their seat and calcine the top of their head, changing its colour from its normal dusky purple to a near-white lavender. Recognizing it as the human equivalent of raising a hand, I turned to the student and gestured for them to speak. So, in your pre-modern society, was there a war between economically collectivist and anti-collectivist forces on your planet that nearly led to self-destruction? I grinned a little, a hardball right out of the gate, particularly considering my American heritage and the Larab society. Yes, though it was fought more like your wars of the web than the wars of brothers. We called it a Cold War, and more generally we would call the style of warfare that often happened in that time proxy wars. The country that once controlled the area I was from was called the United States of America, and they were the first to develop nuclear weapons. They were shortly followed by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and other countries around the world. At that time, America followed a system we called capitalism, which is somewhat likely their concept of Reddinism, though it was much more widespread than Reddinism ever got here. The Soviets followed communism, which is somewhat similar to the system you're used to here. The narrate was still standing up, so I decided to push on a bit. Once both sides had weapons, there was about 200 of our years of unease, military competition and economic competition. Which countries were at the top of the two sides changed some, and even what they were fighting about changed over time, but I'll keep things simple. Historians argue about when exactly the term Cold War applies to, and whether contemporary analysis was right in its focus on economic systems, as opposed to other forces that current analysis focuses on. But that's getting into the weeds for so introductory a talk. If you want to learn more, feel free to contact me, and I can put you in contact with someone who knows more than me. The narrate sank back into its seat, the top of its body fading back to darkness. I called on a new student and got into a flow. I answered a few more questions, nothing really changing after a relatively hard first one. More information on my heritage, recreational activities, the structure of different educational systems. It was an entire half hour before someone asked the question. Harris Applebee's, can you talk about sex again? I saw several narrate gently calcify, indicating they were also rather curious. The small part of me that could still feel mortification after interacting with so many alien cultures tried to shrivel up and die, but I pushed through. Yes, of course. So unlike every other known species in the galaxy, humanity reproduces through sexual reproduction. In fact, our word for your mode of reproduction is named in contrast to our own, asexual reproduction. The intricacies probably don't make a lot of sense for a translator, but generally put, we do something very different from everyone else. I shifted through my papers, getting to the pre-prepared papers I had for this question, which always seem to come up. In human reproduction, two different people need to work together to make offspring. The basics boil down to sperm coming into contact with an egg. About half the population produces sperm and half eggs. Each component carries half the genetic material of the respective parent. When they meet, they fuse and form a whole zygote, which then develops into a new being, similar to your budding process. Given that most of the macro-scale life on our planet reproduces similar to how humans do, we thought it was evolutionary, the most likely form of reproduction to develop. We still don't know why this only seems to be the case on Earth. Research efforts to understand the uniqueness of sexual reproduction are ongoing. There was a murmur through the auditorium. Narrate culture, particularly in this part of the world, was rather private with reproduction. Budding gave off a pleasurable feeling in somewhat controllable waves, but it was seen as gaunt to experience it publicly. The thought of having someone else around to make a baby was very strange to them. It had been explained to me as similar to someone watching you have sex. Some people were into that, but most found the thought vaguely uncomfortable. The narrate were burbling again, less like a hot pot and more like an unusually horny stream. Hormonal development hits all kinds and all sorts of different ways, but horniness was definitely a common one. And the near full-grown but still immature were in the throes of their own hormonal development. So, what does that mean? Like culturally or whatever? How do you get someone else to... What do you do again? Like, physically? Internally, I died a little. Since coming to the stars and figuring out the unique nature of our biology, humans had needed to adapt to a lot, but old values and taboos die hard. Still, the question was genuine, useful, and the answer would help the kids understand a lot of Earth media. Well, the most basic physical act is one person effectively putting a tube in the receptacle of the other person, then depositing sperm. People usually have either a tube, called a penis, or a receptacle, called a vagina, that they are born with, though there are some genetic circumstances which can reduce that to not be true. Also, some people choose to electively change what they were born with to better align to their gender, a concept that is very different for humans than for most other species, which I don't have the time to fully explain, unfortunately. I paused, thinking about what all I had said. With a feeling like I was slightly losing control, I decided I needed to clarify something. And the tube or receptacle are made out of meat. They're part of us. Not separate. Luckily, a surge in student murmuring mostly swallowed my lack of composure. I got a few seconds before the next question came, and tried to put myself back together. So does it feel good? This sex thing? Yes, to most people. Some people don't get much or any pleasure from it, and some find it repulsive. But a large portion of the population does derive significant pleasure from it. Most sexual activity is not for procreation, actually, but rather more for its ability to grant pleasure. I'm not sure if that's a thing that you all have with budding. The sudden cowsing of many in the audience marked out embarrassment. Looks like the pleasures of self-pleasure also extended to the larap as well. I decided to leave the topic and called on another student. Yes, you in the third row. So, I saw this video that someone pulled from the human dataway called Girl Sucks and Fucks Her Boyfriend. So, I think the sucking was with her mouth on a penis, you called it. The meat rod. Anyway, what's fuck? Ah! Ah! The auditorium suddenly seemed to grow intense as everyone looked at me. Good God, the human internet had already breached containment. Of course, I will be caught with this question. I should have seen it coming, but still I struggle to formulate an answer. Well, fuck is another word for sex. It's a rude way to say it. It kind of carries a different meaning, even though it refers to the same thing. So, humanity fucks? Yeah. I was desperately glad when the administrators ended the question section after that, and I was allowed to leave the tractor school for the near full grown, but still immature, and return to my shuttle.